Councilmember Khamis?
Yeah, thank you. I was reading through this ordinance, and I was, I just want to make sure, when we had discussed many times making sure that we have a low-cost plan in our offerings to the public. I don't know that it needs to be in the ordinance, but I was thinking I would find it there, but I didn't find it there. And so I don't know if any member of the staff can let me know why it's not there, or I did actually send an email, nobody responded, so I wanted to know.
Right, do you want to take thank you for your question, Councilmember. So we would be setting the power mix and the rates would be set annually. We're anticipating having a lot more detailed information about that in the risk management policy. That would also be a council policy that we are talking about bringing forward in January of 2018.
Okay, I don't know if you answered my question. Does it need to be in the ordinance, or is it a policy? Is the council policy an adequate guiding principle? Is it more or less legal, or
there is a provision in the ordinance that obligates the council to set the power mix options by resolution, and because those options will change annually, and it's with those options, so customers will pay for. Their rates will be based on the power mix that they choose. And did you want to add something?
I was going to say, so when you get annually, when you see the resolution setting the rates, that's the vehicle that you would have to look at that. But I'll let Leah finish up on the different types of structures.
Oh, I was just going to say that we had talked about in the business plan, when staff brought the business plan, they had talked about a power mix 10% more with a rate that is offering power mixes that have 10% more renewables than PG&E's level, than PG&E, and 100% renewables, and then you set the rates to match those. And we had talked about the rates being competitive with PG&E's rates for those. That's what the business plan showed.
Well, I know what the business plan showed. I just also know what we've voted on and passed, which was to make sure that there's a low-cost plan. It had nothing to do with how much the power mix was of 10% renewable, more renewable or not. It was just going to be cheaper than PG&E's rates, and that's what we passed.
Right, and that will be established with the rates.
So here's my hesitance in voting for this. It seems like I have to explain myself over and over again, and if it's not in the ordinance, I don't think I'll be voting for it. I want there to be written documentation that we have a low-cost plan in our mix at all times. And that's what we voted on after we had those meetings.
Yes, and I appreciate that. So what you're looking for is not an annual sort of approval of the rates. We can certainly include that in the policy. Are you thinking, because we looked at other ordinances and we've been working with outside counsel and of course in-house counsel, and that kind of information is typically not included in the ordinance. So we were kind of following that framework. We can certainly put that in the risk management policy, which is again a council policy.
Why wouldn't it be included in the ordinance? If we want to, and that's what I thought it was going to be. I honestly thought that the low-cost plan option was going to be enshrined in the ordinance, and therefore future council members don't really have to go and get re-educated on this every time we determine the rates.
Speaking of keeping the lights on, it's a function of setting your rates and making sure that you recover all the costs of providing the service. And while
I'm completely aware of that. And I know that our city's goals are to try to provide more renewable energy. And I'm good with that. But if people can't, but if people don't want to go along with that plan, we had set in place a low-cost plan to be part of the mix. And
Councilmember, may I ask a point of clarification? So by low-cost plan, you're not referring to the eligible assistance programs, right?
no,
Okay.
no, that's
Yeah, I
not
didn't
what,
think so.
that's not what it was intended at all. And now I'm going to insist on it being in the ordinance, because we're obviously confused more than I don't want to have any more confusion. So if we can include in the ordinance a mandate for the department to have a low-cost plan, I'm ready to make that motion.
If I can ask, what do you mean by a low-cost plan? So if we had to define it in the ordinance, what would that mean?
A third option where the city would not take into consideration the renewable energy mix and just try to get the lowest cost rates possible.
Yeah, I thought the low-cost plan was actually 10% of the GHG more than.
So 10% more, and then competitive with PG&E. It's hard for us to predict what PG&E is going to do with their rates, right?
Right.
So to always be committed to staying below PG&E rates and meet the renewables requirement, which we will be subject to anyway, the state renewable requirements. It's a hard thing to kind of put in and state that as a number.
Right.
So if we wanted to say always lower than PG&E, that could create some risk in the future as well.
Right.
Well, so you're saying that you're going to create the rates after PG&E announces their rates, which is perfect, because if you know their rates, then we know that we can have a low-cost plan goal.
Councilmember Khamis, I think you've misunderstood. I don't think that's what she's saying.
Yeah, so we would be setting our rates along with the way we set other rates, so as part of the budget process, and that's why we had something that said we could be setting rates twice a year. So if PG&E sets their goes to CPUC in January of every year, so if we needed to adjust to stay competitive, because we obviously have to stay competitive, right, for people to be in the plan. We would have the flexibility to do that, but if we said we're always going to be lower than PG&E, I think we're setting ourselves up for problems in the future.
And that's not what I said. I didn't say that. I never said we always have to be lower than PG&E. I just said that we have to have a low-cost plan, and that's what we decided on in public. I know it's not. I know it's not possible to outmaneuver PG&E. But I think that we should have a low-cost plan in case somebody who is not as able to afford our energy is able to afford energy, and somebody and so also so as not to lose customers. On top of that, to keep us competitive, because the less customers we have, the more the overhead is going to be, and the higher. And it's a vicious cycle. And so I don't want this plan to fail, since I voted for it. But what I did vote for is to have a third plan, which would be called the low-cost option. And I'd like that enshrined in this ordinance language.
Perhaps could I interject for just a moment, just to understand clearly? What I understood we voted on was the lowest cost option was 10% greater GHG. I'm sorry. 10% greater composition of GHG-free sources than PG&E, and with the goal of being cost competitive with PG&E. That is not what
that is not. I'm pretty.
Yes.
That's not what we voted on. That wasn't the intention that I.
Ashwini, perhaps.
Yes, so I was trying to see if I could just pull up the exact language, but yes, we were supposed to be 10% more renewables, and then we said we would be cost competitive and never lower than PG&E. I mean, we couldn't guarantee that. We would like to be lower or at, and so I think that was the concern of putting it in the ordinance. If we did put in a low-cost plan, we would have to define it. And if we're always benchmarking
Right.
against PG&E, I'm not quite sure how to define
So
that.
what I wanted to offer, if this is a solution, I don't know if it is, if it satisfies Councilmember Khamis' concern, but that was the lowest cost option that we had defined. That if we had to include something in the ordinance, it would say that the lowest cost energy plan that had at least 10% greater sourcing of non-GHG emitting or renewable sources of electricity. That is the lowest cost within those parameters. And I'm not sure that fully addresses what Councilmember Khamis was getting at, but I think at least that would avoid the problem of you having to, codify an ordinance that we're going to hit a particular price, which I know we can't do. Councilmember Khamis?
I thought we were going to have 3 plans. One, this 10% GHG. One, 100% GHG free, which I'll agree that for hypothetical reasons that exists. And one was going to be a low-cost plan for people who don't necessarily care about being GHG free and wanted just to save money so that we can be competitive. That was the intent to the thing that we passed. I mean, I can go back. If you want, we could defer this, and we can go back and go to the videos and see what was said, because that's what I feel that I voted on.
And Councilmember, we haven't decided what exactly the plans. I mean, that was something that we would have to bring once we do the procurement, bring it forward to council. Here are the options.
I understand, but this is post. I mean, it's like evaluating the game after it happens, and that's not my intent here. At this point, I will make a motion to defer this until we can get a clearer definition of what was passed, because I'd like to go back to the video and see exactly what was said and what was passed, just so that we can be clear.
Okay.
All right, there's a motion and a second to defer. Ashwini, could you tell us, are there any time constraints here that we should be concerned about?
We're kind of, for a spring launch, we're on a pretty tight timeline. But
Okay. Could you just refer us, I'm looking at the memo now to try to understand if there's a prior date that it might refer to, that we can quickly resolve this issue while we're taking open comment and open hearing, and then perhaps return to it, because I'm guessing we can pretty readily pull up a prior report that will very quickly identify the options that we voted on. My recollection was a 10% above PG&E, 50, by that I mean 10% renewable source above, a 50%, I think 100, something along those lines. But we can hopefully pull that up and then answer the question. Would that be something I could ask you to do now while we go to open forum?
I think it was the August 8th or the August 27th meeting.
Okay.
Either of those that it was discussed.
So could I suggest then we take up open forum now to see if we might be able to get an answer to the question and then return? Okay.
You could take open forum.
Yeah,
Sure.
Why don't we do that, and we'll come back and take this up. Councilor Khamis?
Yeah, well, I have to respectfully disagree. I think there is no specificity as to the time in which. So I have this on multiple occasions. There's at least 3 different times that I've actually seen it in writing and on video now that I could pull all this up for you. There's May 16th, May 18th, and one memo signed by Mr. Sykes before he became our city manager on page 1 of his memo, dated 8/8, item 7.2, the executive summary, where it actually calls out this exact language that I'm talking about. Offer at least one power mix option with rate equal to or less than PG&E's rates. Offer at least one mix option at 10% or more renewable PG&E. And there's another one that says 100% of GHG free energy. So there's numerous times where we're referred to this. This is not something that I'm inventing out of thin air. Number two, this language doesn't say that it has to be offer at least one power mix option with a rate equal to or less than PG&E rates. There's nowhere in there that it says that it has to be done 100% of the time. There's nowhere in there that I see that we can, if the rates jumped up by PG&E that we would or somehow go down, that we'd have to somehow go down, right? That's where we would get into trouble. Not if PG&E raised their rates, but if PG&E dropped their rates, that's when we would get in trouble, and that we didn't match that. So I don't see it as a legal problem because it's vague enough, and if we outline that we're going to do this twice a year, I think is good enough. The worry that I have is that number one worry that I have is that ever since this process started, staff has not been all that cooperative with us from day one. They never provided the opposing points of view, and I think we discussed that infinitum. We actually had to have 4 meetings until we actually had a neutral party come and tell us this. And now I don't see things being codified in a way that we all voted on more than once already. And so forgive me for having a little bit of skepticism as to if this directive, if this plan is going to be carried out if it's not in writing. And that's my worry, that if it's not in writing, every year some council is going to think whatever they're going to think and do whatever they're going to do. And quite frankly, that's not the way we plan this. And I would be an extremely incensed if we don't include this in this language that we've already voted on multiple times.
Councilmember Khamis, just to be clear, what you want codified is that they would be offered, right? That would be offered. Okay. Specifically to that, staff have concerns about including that in the ordinance?
I think, Rick, as you were suggesting, maybe offering that, but then notwithstanding.
Right. I think, and I'm going to take Councilmember Khamis' comment of when you say not 100% of the time, because there's always an exception that you may need to cover for in any given year. If it were to be put into the into the ordinance, we would want at least the ability that there may be a need for an exception in any given year, notwithstanding you still have to cover your expenses.
I think there's plenty of expense language in the ordinance. I think I've seen it on 3 separate occasions where we had to recover the cost, but I'm okay with saying that there could be, if you want to put a legal caveat there, I'm okay with that.
We would want to do that if we put in the ordinance. Yes.
That's fine, and I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to get the city into trouble. I am trying to make sure that we follow the letter of the things that we passed. In your own memo, City Manager.
So, coming back to David Ashwini, I think the suggestion is, with some qualifying language, that there would be specific direction in the ordinance to offer. So, just about that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
and
something you can do.
I think we're fine with that, and then I certainly want to just stress that we weren't trying to avoid the direction. I purely felt like in our discussions we saw that as part of the risk management policy and the rate setting exercise. In the ordinances that we looked in, they didn't have that type of direction. But if this council wants that in there, we will obviously work with that and see no issue with that.
Thank you. And so I think I made a motion to include it in the language, and it was seconded by Councilmember Davis.
No, I think your motion is deferred, but you can make that motion now.
I'll make the motion to include the language of what was stated in City Manager's memo dated 8/8. It's the 8/8 meeting, item 7.2.
I think it's been repeated in several memos, so I think staff is clear.
Yeah, it's really the memo talks about what council direction was.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want that in there with whatever caveat, if PG&E raises their rates unexpectedly, if you want to put whatever the language that would get us out of hot water, if PG&E were to make sudden moves, whatever.
Yeah, I just want to give the flexibility to the city to be able to adjust rates or set rates that cover the necessary operating expenses.
That's fine with me. I just, whatever, I don't know how to put that in a motion, so whatever
Yeah,
you,
so codifying council direction in the ordinance.
Just to clarify, related to the rates only, right? Because there's a lot of bullets under that.
Yes.
So just related to the rates, and then
the
we
rate
would add.
option.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
And we
second?
would add that in, what chapter is that? So we just get that. 26.40 rates and charges for electricity in the ordinance. So we would add the language to that, and then include language about, needing to make sure we're covering operating expenses.
Okay. Was that a second, Councilmember Davis? Okay, it was. So that's the current motion. Other questions or comments? All right, let's vote on the motion. I believe with this vote, the meeting is adjourned. That measure passes. Thanks, everybody.